Snow fell thick upon Frosthaven's walls, each flake catching the light of the torches like embers in the night. The city was hushed, expectant, as though it too held its breath. Word had spread swiftly of the envoy's attack in the Great Hall, and of their master's promise. Kaelor was coming. From the battlements, Rohan gazed north. Beyond the frozen plains, the horizon flickered faintly with firelight. Raiders, warbands, something more. Even from this distance, he could sense it. A tide gathering, black and endless. Varric joined him, iron helm under one arm, his face as grim as carved stone. Scouts report thousands, my lord. Not rabble. A host. Banners we do not know, beasts not seen in the north since the old wars. They march under Kaelor's hand. Rohan said nothing for a long moment. The shard at his breast was alive with heat, like a second pulse, feeding off his dread. Thousands, he murmured. And we have, what? A few hundred men at arms? Some farmers with spears? Frosthaven has never faced such a storm. Varric grunted. We have walls. We have steel. And we have you. His eyes narrowed. If you will use it. The word struck harder than any blow. Rohan turned to him, fury flashing. You would have me embrace that curse? Call upon sorcery to save us? You saw what it does, Varric. Every time I draw on it, I lose more of myself. Aye, Varric said evenly. But if you don't, you may lose Frosthaven. And what use is your soul if all your people are ash? The wind howled between them, carrying the taste of snow and iron. A horn sounded from below. Aelin ascended the stairs two at a time, her cloak flaring in the wind. The council gathers, Rohan. They demand your word. Some want to flee south. Others whisper of surrender. Surrender, Rohan spat. To Kaelor? Aelin's face was pale in the torchlight. Fear makes men fools. They see an army in the snow and forget the cost of chains. If you do not bind them to you now, Rohan, they will break before the first blade falls. Her words hung heavy. He looked out once more across the plains, where shadows moved like a sea of beasts. They want my word? He said at last. His voice was low, dangerous. Then they shall have it. He turned, cloak whipping, and strode down the battlements toward the council chamber. Behind him, Varric followed in silence, and Aelin's eyes burned with both fear and fierce loyalty. Below, the city murmured, mothers clutching children, smiths hammering through the night, soldiers sharpening rusted spears. All waiting for what their lord would say. And in the distance, the horizon burned brighter, fire crawling across the snow like the first edge of dawn. The storm was coming. The council chamber was ablaze with torches, but the heat could not thaw the frost of fear that hung in the air. Banners drooped from the rafters, their colors dim in the smoky light, while the lords of Frosthaven shouted over one another like carrion crows fighting for scraps. Thousands, they say, a tide of steel and fire. Lord Dareth's voice cracked as he slammed his fist on the table. We cannot stand against it. Better to yield and live than to defy and perish. Yield? Barked Varric, stepping forward. His voice carried the weight of iron. You'd bend knee to the very butcher who burns your villages and feeds your children to his beasts. Better a living dog than a dead lion, Dareth sneered. You think our walls will save us? You think Frosthaven, with its crumbling stones and starving peasants, can withstand Kaelor's host? You're mad. Others shouted their agreement. Fear festered in their voices. Some muttered of opening the gates, of bargaining with Kaelor for mercy. Lady Eris rose, her silver hair glinting in the torchlight. Her gaze was sharp as any blade. Cowards, all of you. We have survived worse storms. Frosthaven has never knelt, not to southern kings nor northern sorcerers. And I'll not see her kneel now. If our lord leads us, we fight. A murmur of approval rippled through the hall, but it was drowned swiftly by shouts of dissent. At the head of the chamber, Rohan stood silent. His shadow loomed long across the floor, cast by the fire that hissed and spat behind him. The shard at his chest burned hot, as if eager for him to speak, to command, to bind every man and woman in the room with the dark power humming in his blood. But he forced it down, jaw tight. My lords, my ladies, he said at last, and though his voice was steady, it carried like a blade cutting through the din. The chamber fell silent, all eyes fixed upon him. You speak of surrender, of safety. But tell me, what safety lies in chains? Do you think Kaelor leaves his servants alive once their use is spent? Do you think his mercy will spare your children? No, his mercy is ash, his gift is slavery. And I will not trade my people's lives for shackles. A few nodded, emboldened. Others muttered, uneasy. Dareth's lip curled. Brave words, my lord. But words do not stop armies. Words do not break steel. You promise us freedom, but can you deliver it? Or will you lead us to the pyre with noble speeches while Kaelor laughs? The silence that followed was a dagger at Rohan's throat. The council waited. His men waited. His city waited. He could tell them of the shard. He could show them the frost fire that leapt from his hands, prove he had power enough to shatter armies. But the thought turned his stomach. If he revealed it now, would they see salvation, or a monster? Aelin stepped forward, her voice fierce. You speak of doubt, Dareth, but where were you when raiders burned the frontier? Where were you when Rohan rode at the head of his men, bleeding and broken, and still broke the enemy like kindling? He has given his flesh, his blood, his soul to this city. Will you give nothing but cowardice? The chamber stirred, divided, torn between fear and fury. Rohan felt the shard pulse again, like a heartbeat urging him to seize the moment. Show them, bind them, make them yours. His hand twitched toward the clasp of his cloak. And in that moment, the great doors of the chamber burst open. A soldier stumbled inside, blood freezing on his armor, his face pale with terror. They're here, he gasped. Kaelor's vanguard, at the northern gate. The chamber erupted in chaos. The bells of Frosthaven tolled like the beating of a frantic heart. Their clangor rang out across the snowbound city, rousing peasants from their beds and soldiers from their barracks. Fires flared on the ramparts as men rushed to arms, pulling on cloaks and strapping bucklers with trembling hands. Rohan was already moving, striding through the keep's corridors with Aelin and Gildred close behind. His cloak billowed behind him, heavy with frost. Outside, the night sky was a bruise of storm clouds, moonlight choked by drifting snow. On the walls, the scene was chaos. Archers hurried to their posts, shivering, their breath smoking in the air. Along the northern gate, lanterns revealed the enemy, dark shapes swarming from the tree line, shields raised, torches burning like a tide of fire against the snow. The vanguard of Kaelor's host had come. Not an army in full, but a spear meant to pierce Frosthaven's heart. Gildred's voice boomed above the din. Archers, knock, loose at will. The first volley whistled out, arrows vanishing into the dark. Screams rose as shadows fell, but more pressed forward. The clash of drums echoed from beyond the hills, steady and merciless. Rohan's grip tightened on the hilt of his sword. He could feel the shard humming in his chest, heat coiling, frost licking the edge of his veins. It wanted to be unleashed. It hungered. Hold the line, he shouted, forcing his voice above the storm. Do not yield an inch. But already the gate trembled under the assault. Battering rams thudded against the ironwood doors, each strike rattling the teeth of the men standing watch. Snow blew sideways as the storm grew, and Rohan's hair whipped across his brow. Beside him, Aelin pressed a hand to the battlements. Her eyes scanned the field. They're testing us. The full host isn't here yet. If they breach the gate before dawn, the city won't hold. Gildred spat over the wall, his face grim. Then we hold, till dawn. Steel and blood. No other way. But Rohan knew there was another way. The shard throbbed, the frostfire rising like a tide inside him. He could already imagine it, the storm of ice sweeping across the enemy, freezing them where they stood, breaking the vanguard in a single breath. His men would cheer. His people would bow their heads in awe. And Kaelor would laugh. A voice whispered in his mind, velvet and cruel. Yes, wolf. Take it. Taste it. You think you command it, but it commands you. Still, let it spill, and the field will be yours. Rohan's breath misted in the cold air. His knuckles whitened on the hilt of his blade. Then a scream cut through the night. He turned just in time to see a ladder slam against the wall, raiders swarming upward. Aelin drew steel, cutting one loose, his body tumbling into the dark. Gildred bellowed orders, pulling men to the breach. And still the rams struck the gate, louder, closer to splintering. Rohan's soldiers looked to him, fear in their eyes. Not just fear of the enemy, but fear of what he might do. One choice: steel or sorcery, his honor or his city. The shard flared. Frost traced the stones beneath his boots. He raised his sword. The ram struck one final time, and the gate cracked like a bone-splitting. A roar erupted from the enemy host as the doors buckled inward, ironwood splinters flying through the air. Shields up. Gildred bellowed, dragging men into formation. Spears lowered, shields locked. The first wave of raiders poured through the breach, torches and axes raised, their howls carrying over the storm. The clash was immediate, steel on steel, cries of pain, the thud of bodies hitting the snow-slick ground. The defenders fought hard, but the enemy pressed like a tide, endless, merciless. Rohan stood above the chaos, sword trembling in his grasp. The shard pulsed in his chest, a drumbeat of ice and fire. His breath frosted the air, though no wind touched him. His men were being pushed back step by step, and the gate would fall entirely within moments. Rohan, Aelin shouted, blood on her cheek, eyes burning. Do it. Her voice broke whatever restraint he had left. He raised his blade, and the world went silent. The shard ignited. A blast of frost fire surged outward, rolling from his chest like the breath of a dragon. The air screamed as a storm of jagged ice burst from his body, sweeping down the gatehouse and through the breach. Raiders froze mid-charge, torches extinguished, bodies turning to statues of ice. Shards exploded from the ground, piercing shields and flesh alike. Men on both sides staggered, blinded by the glare. Rohan roared, the sound not entirely human, his voice layered with something deeper, something ancient. The storm obeyed his fury, lashing outward in waves, and the vanguard shattered like brittle glass. Silence fell. Only the moan of the wind remained. Then came the looks. His men stared at him, not with triumph, but with terror. They had seen courage before. They had seen blood. But this was something else, something unholy. Frost clung to their beards, their armor, their very lashes, as if his power had reached even them. Gildred lowered his axe, eyes wide. By the Maker? Aelin, still breathing hard, stepped to Rohan's side. Her hand almost reached for his arm but stopped inches away, as though touching him might burn. You saved us, she whispered. Yet even she could not hide the tremor in her voice. Rohan's chest heaved. His sword dripped frost instead of blood. Beneath his skin, the shard pulsed with triumph, as though mocking him. He wanted to tell them it was still him, that he had chosen this, not the shard. But when he opened his mouth, his voice cracked like ice breaking. And in the distance, across the frozen field, horns sounded. Deep, sonorous, endless. Kaelor's true army was coming. The vanguard had only been the beginning. The horns grew louder, rolling across the valley like thunder. The men on the walls turned pale, their breath caught in their throats as the sound vibrated in their bones. Not the whole host, Gildred muttered, his jaw clenched. But even before the words left him, the truth was visible through the snow. Beyond the frozen plain, torches flared, hundreds, then thousands, forming a vast river of firelight that stretched to the horizon. Shields gleamed, spears bristled like a forest of iron. Between the ranks, hulking shapes lumbered forward, their forms blurred by snow but massive enough to make the earth tremble with each step. Kaelor had brought his army at last. The defenders on the gatehouse exchanged looks of despair. The breach had only just been sealed with blood and ice, and now the real storm was upon them. Rohan stood unmoving, his sword still rimmed with frost. Inside him, the shard throbbed like a second heart, whispering power, strength, inevitability. He tried to slow his breathing, to ground himself, but each pulse of the shard made him feel less human, more like the frozen statues he had left behind. Look, Aelin whispered, her hand gripping the parapet until her knuckles whitened. At the center of the enemy host, a figure rode a beast of bone and frost. A tall man draped in robes blacker than midnight, a crown of ice jagged upon his brow, eyes burning like cold embers in the dark. His mere presence seemed to bend the storm around him. Kaelor. Even across the distance, Rohan felt the gaze fall upon him, sharp as a blade. The shard inside him answered, vibrating, yearning. For a moment, Rohan's vision blurred. He saw not the battlefield but a throne of obsidian ice, saw himself kneeling before it, saw Kaelor extending a hand. No, Rohan growled under his breath, clutching his temple. But the vision clung to him like tar, sickly sweet, promising release from doubt and fear. The men around him shuffled uneasily, whispering, "That's him, the shadow of the north. Frost Lord." Gildred spat into the snow. "We hold till dawn. We don't break. Not while breath remains." His words sounded like iron, but the men's eyes flicked back to Rohan. Fear not just of the enemy but of their own commander. The memory of his storm, The ice that had devoured men and ground alike still lingered in their minds. Aelin saw it too. She moved close, lowering her voice so only Rohan could hear. "They need to see you as a man, not a monster. Speak to them, Rohan. Or we'll lose them before Kaelor even strikes." He swallowed hard, throat dry as bone. To speak felt impossible. The shard wanted to roar, to command, not to plead. But he forced the words out. "Brothers," he called, raising his blade skyward. The frost along its edge shimmered blue in the torchlight. "You see what comes against us. You see the tide, the storm, the darkness. And yet here we stand, still breathing, still holding. Tonight, Frosthaven does not fall. Not while I draw breath." The men cheered, some louder than others, the sound more desperate than confident. Yet for a moment, it was enough to steady the lines. Kaelor, from his place upon the beast, raised one pale hand. His host stilled as though bound by a single will. Then, with a gesture smooth as snowfall, he pointed toward Frosthaven's gate. The earth shook. The hulking shapes at the front of his army stepped forward, giants wrought of ice and stone, their eyes glowing with frozen fire. Each carried a weapon forged from glaciers themselves, taller than any man. And with a thunderous crash, the march began. The true siege had begun. The giants advanced like an avalanche, slow, unstoppable, each step shaking frost from the battlements. Their forms glimmered with moonlight caught in frozen stone, veins of icy fire pulsing beneath their skin. The defenders loosed arrows and bolts, the sky filling with black streaks. Most shattered harmlessly against the giants' icy hides. A few stuck, but it was like stinging a mountain, annoyance, not injury. "Ballisti!" Gildred roared. The great engines creaked, their ropes taut with frost. When the first bolt flew, it struck one giant square in the chest, bursting in a spray of shards. The monster stumbled, bellowing like a glacier breaking. But still it advanced. The second bolt went wide. The third snapped before firing, flinging shards of wood across the crew. The men cursed, scrambling to reload, hands numb from the cold. On the wall, Rohan's breath quickened. The shard inside him burned hotter with every thunderous step of the enemy. His vision blurred. The storm seemed alive, each snowflake a whisper urging him to unleash it again. "Break them, freeze them, let the storm devour." "Rohan!" Aelin's hand closed on his arm, grounding him. "Don't lose yourself. Not yet." Her voice barely cut through the whispers, but it was enough. For the moment. Below, the first giant reached the outer palisade. With a single sweep of its glacier blade, it splintered timber into flying spears of ice. Men screamed, bodies broken against the stone. Another giant lifted a boulder larger than a horse and hurled it. The rock smashed into the gatehouse, sending cracks through the masonry. Dust and snow rained down. The walls trembled. Kaelor's army surged forward, a tide of black steel and frost-marked banners. War cries rose, carried on the storm. Among them, darker sounds, low, guttural chants. The air thickened, heavy with a presence that pressed into the defenders' minds. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like wind through reeds. Then clearer, a voice that slid into their ears and hearts, smooth as oil, cold as ice. "Why bleed for a lost cause?" it murmured. "Why die on frozen stone when warmth waits beyond the wall?" Men staggered, lowering bows. One dropped his spear, clutching his head. Another sobbed, whispering, "It's true, it's hopeless." Gildred drew his sword and struck the flat of the blade against a shield. "Ignore it, steel your hearts." But the whispers multiplied. Now they carried names. Soldiers heard dead wives, lost fathers, fallen comrades, voices that should not be. Promises of peace, reunion, an end to suffering. Rohan felt it too. Not voices of strangers, his mother's lullaby, his father's stern counsel, his sister's laughter. Then darker ones. Screams of those he had frozen alive, begging for mercy. The shards surged, feeding the torment. Kaelor, he spat through clenched teeth. The enemy lord was no longer distant. He stood at the heart of Rohan's thoughts, speaking without words. "You are mine already, shard bearer. Each breath draws you closer. Why resist the tide?" The temptation was a blade, sharp and sweet. To yield would mean power. Power enough to crush giants, to silence the whispers, to end the siege. But it would also mean losing himself forever. "Rohan!" Aelin's voice cut through again, this time sharp as steel. She pressed a charm into his palm, a small token of woven threads and bone, a relic of her order. Anchor yourself. Now. The touch steadied him, for now. But as another giant's blow split stone and men fell screaming, as Kaelor's army surged closer, Rohan knew the choice would not wait much longer. He would either master the shard, or it would master him. And above the storm, Kaelor raised his hand once more. From the dark behind him came a new sound, the beating of colossal wings. Something greater than giants was coming. The sky above the battlements split with a roar that shook snow from the eaves. Wingbeats thundered across Frosthaven, drowning even the clamor of clashing steel. Men stumbled, their eyes rising to behold a creature older than memory. A frost drake, scales black as midnight and edged with icy silver, eyes glowing like twin auroras. Rohan felt the shard pulse violently. It hungered now, not for battle alone, but for domination, for complete surrender. The drake circled once, twice, and its shadow fell across the walls like a moving storm. "Hold your ground," Gildred shouted, though his voice was lost in the roar. The ballistae fired again, great bolts stabbing into the sky. One struck the drake in the chest, a spark of frost erupting, but it barely flinched. Aelin gripped Rohan's arm, her eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. "This is no ordinary battle," she said. "It's a test, of heart, of will. If the shard controls you, it will kill us all." Rohan swallowed. His fingers itched to summon the storm within the shard, to let the frost pour forth and freeze the drake midair. But he hesitated. Last time he had given in, the frost had killed friend and foe alike indiscriminately. Could he control it now, or would it devour him utterly? The drake landed atop the outer wall with a crash that shattered stone and sent defenders tumbling. Ice spat from its jaws, snapping like fire in the cold night. One breath turned shields brittle, splintering them before men could raise their weapons. Kaelor appeared beside the beast, a shadow woven into frost itself. His hands moved in silent incantations, and the shard in Rohan's chest hummed with recognition. The connection between sorcerer and shard tightened, a living chain invisible but unbreakable. "Yield," Kaelor whispered in Rohan's mind, soft and terrible. "You cannot hold the storm. Bow, and all will be yours." The shard pulsed again, hotter, faster. Rohan clenched his jaw, feeling every whisper of the dead, every tremor of frost inside him. He realized the choice. Unleash the shard fully, or risk the city, risk his men, risk everything to resist Kaelor's hand. "Now or never," Gildred growled, slamming his gauntlet against Rohan's shoulder. "Do not let fear dictate your hand." Rohan's eyes closed. He reached into the shard, not to wield it as before, not to obey it, but to speak to it. A violent pulse surged through him, as though the shard were alive, tasting his will, challenging him. He felt Kaelor's presence, felt the drake's intent, the army's hunger, but he did not bend. A breath, a heartbeat. Then, he released. The shard flared in an eruption of white-blue frost, controlled, precise, like a frozen lance shooting from his chest. It struck the drake squarely, encasing its wings in thick crystal. The beast roared in fury and terror, thrashing against the bonds of ice, but Rohan's will held. Below, the giants stumbled, disrupted by the pulse. Men rallied, seizing the moment. Arrows and swords found gaps in their armor, the front line pushed forward. Frost and fire clashed in a deadly ballet. Kaelor recoiled, his spell faltering as he realized Rohan had not succumbed. "Impossible," he hissed. The drake bellowed, snapping free of some chains but unable to maintain flight. It crashed into the snow-drenched courtyard, fighting for every breath. Rohan stumbled, breath heaving, hands trembling. The shard had obeyed him, for now. But the cost was clear. Every surge of frost drained him, left him weaker, more exposed. And Kaelor was not yet done. Above the walls, snow whipped like knives. The drake's wings thrashed, giant ice shards tearing through the ramparts. Men screamed, shields splintered, but the tide had shifted. Frosthaven's defenders, inspired by Rohan's defiance, pressed forward. Aelin stood at his side, her silver gaze unwavering. "You did it," she said. "You held yourself, and them." Rohan only nodded, though every muscle in his body screamed. This was a victory, but a temporary one. Kaelor's hand was still out there, reaching, pulling. The shard had obeyed once, but the war inside him and against the sorcerer was far from over. The drake, trapped partially in frost, lifted its head, glaring at Rohan with burning eyes. Kaelor's voice echoed in the winds, bitter and triumphant. "This is only the beginning, wolf. Yield not, and I will teach you how truly cold the world can be." Rohan gritted his teeth, staring down at the beast and the shadow behind it. Frosthaven still stood, but the siege had only just begun. And somewhere in the distance, the next move waited, cruel and inevitable. The chill inside the council chambers was sharper than any winter wind outside. Candles burned low, their flames flickering across faces lined with suspicion and fear. Rohan had returned from the walls, weary and bloodied, yet victorious, or so it seemed. But within these stone halls, victory was measured differently. Lord Dareth's eyes glinted with calculation. "The city's walls are strong, yet no wall can stop treachery from within," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We must act, before this wolf grows stronger than even our king's justice can hold." Aelin, standing just behind Rohan, stiffened. She sensed the currents swirling beneath polite bows and whispered salutations. "Heed the words of your counsel carefully," she warned Rohan. "Victory on the walls does not mean the city is safe. The rot may already be inside these halls." Rohan's hand itched toward the shard at his chest. He felt Kaelor's laughter, carried faintly on the wind, teasing, daring. The drake had been subdued, but the sorcerer had planted deeper seeds. Now, whispers in the council were the weapons. Doubt, betrayal, and ambition moved unseen, ready to strike. From a shadowed corner, Lady Eris stepped forward. Her expression was immaculate, composed. Yet her eyes betrayed impatience and calculation. "The men hail you as hero, Lord," she said, her tone smooth as polished stone. "But words are wind. How long before the city itself tires of a ruler whose sword answers for him more than his mind?" Rohan's jaw tightened. "And what would you have me do, Lady Eris? Sit idly as the frost spreads in my hands and in my people's hearts?" Eris's lips curved slightly, a serpent smile. "Sometimes, a ruler must not act at all. Sometimes, he must allow the pieces to move, and others to fall." Gildred, standing nearby, shifted uneasily. He muttered under his breath, loud enough for only Rohan to hear. "There are vipers here, and the frost outside is nothing compared to the cold in their hearts." A servant arrived then, trembling, bearing a sealed missive. The wax bore the mark of the Eastern Lords, those who had watched Frosthaven's borders and now whispered of rebellion. Rohan tore it open with hands still shaking from battle. "The city will fall not to blades, but to those who bend the truth. Beware the walls you trust. Beware the hand that bows but plots." The words burned like ice. He looked up at the council, every face suddenly suspect. The shard in his chest throbbed, a heartbeat, a warning, a tether of power he could not yet release fully. "Someone here speaks with hidden lips," Rohan growled, his voice low, dangerous. "And I will find them, before they turn Frosthaven into ashes and betrayal." The council murmured unease, but none denied it. Aelin placed a firm hand on his arm, steadying him. "Let the shard be your guide," she whispered. "But your judgment must rule, not its hunger." Rohan nodded. He could feel the frost tightening, eager, pulling at his will. He would use it, not as Kaelor's pawn, but as a shield, a weapon against the unseen threats. And if he had to, he would burn through the shard's hunger to expose the traitors. Suddenly, the chamber doors burst open. A group of guards, wide-eyed, rushed in, dragging with them a man in the council's own livery. His hands were bound, his face pale as snow. "They were plotting," one guard gasped. "They conspired with the Eastern Lords. They would have opened the gates when the drake returned." Rohan's eyes narrowed. The shard pulsed violently, sensing betrayal, sensing blood. Aelin stepped forward, her silver gaze locking on the prisoner. "Then they underestimated you, Lord," she said softly. "And they underestimated Frosthaven." Rohan's hands itched to unleash the shard, to interrogate, to punish, to burn away the deception with the frost that had been both his salvation and his curse. But he stopped, breathing hard. "Control," he reminded himself. "Control." The council members, shaken and fearful, fell silent. The traitor's eyes darted, wild with terror. Rohan approached, each step measured, deliberate. "Tell me," he said, voice low, lethal in its calm. "Who sent you? And what price did they promise for Frosthaven's betrayal?" The man trembled, lips quivering. "Kaelor, he promised gold, power, survival if Frosthaven fell." Rohan's teeth clenched. The shard pulsed, echoing Kaelor's mocking heartbeat through him. But he forced it to obey, to simmer instead of surge. He could feel the next wave coming, outside and inside. The Drake's shadow, the Eastern Lords, Kaelor's curse, all intertwined. And he realized something chilling. The battle for Frosthaven was no longer only upon the walls. It was inside every chamber, whispered in every hall, written in every heart. Rohan stepped back, letting his gaze sweep over council, guards, and traitor alike. "Then we begin the cleansing," he said. "And Kaelor will learn that Frosthaven's wolf does not yield to whispers or threats." Aelin's hand tightened on his arm. "And if he comes for you again?" Rohan's eyes gleamed, cold and determined, yet weary. "Then we will meet him, not as men, not as pawns, but as masters of our own storm." Outside, snow began to fall heavier, masking the sounds of the city, hiding the stirrings of those still loyal to Kaelor. Inside, shadows lengthened. Frosthaven had survived the walls, but the siege of hearts and minds had only just begun. And in that quiet, a new threat stirred, unseen, waiting for the moment to strike. The storm outside had grown fierce, driving snow like daggers against Frosthaven's walls. The city slept uneasily, though few dared call it sleep. Candles burned low in windows, shutters rattled against icy gusts. In the shadows, unseen, Kaelor moved like a phantom, every step measured, every spell precise. He had felt Rohan's surge of frost, the shard pulsing with restrained fury, and smiled. A wolf tamed for a moment, yes, but the tether still hummed in the sorcerer's favor. Tonight, he would stretch that tether further. Within the city, Rohan patrolled the walls alongside Aelin and a handful of loyal guards. The traitor's confession had set the council in turmoil, but Rohan knew the danger was far from over. Kaelor's reach was long, his schemes never simple. "Something moves," whispered one of the sentries, eyes scanning the darkness. Down near the east gate. Rohan's gaze sharpened. Snow and night hid more than shadows, they hid intent. The shard throbbed in his chest, and a familiar, chilling voice echoed faintly. "Hunger, pain, fear, they are mine to command." Aelin placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. "Control it," she urged. "The frost obeys you, Rohan." "Not him." He nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. Each time he wielded the shard, Kaelor's laughter lingered, a spectral echo in his mind. Yet there was no turning back. The city's walls had to hold, and Frosthaven's people had to believe in their lord. The east gate shuddered as a shadow slipped through, swathed in black and silver. A chill not born of winter spread as Kaelor's emissary stepped into the torchlight. The figure's eyes glowed faintly red beneath a hood, and the air seemed to bite at Rohan's throat. "You bring me news?" Rohan called, blade ready, though his voice betrayed no fear. The figure's lips moved, chanting softly. Frost crawled across the stones, black eyes snaking like living veins. Guards cried out, but the shadow waved a hand, and steel froze in their grasp. Rohan's heart raced. The shard pulsed furiously, drawn to the magic, drawn to the intent. He raised his sword. Dark frost leapt outward, meeting the encroaching spell in a clash of cold and steel. Sparks of magic danced across the battlements, hissing as ice met frost. "Do you think a wolf can fight a storm?" the emissary hissed, voice layered with Kaelor's mockery. "Your blade is mine, even now. You serve my purpose whether you will it or not." Rohan gritted his teeth. "I serve Frosthaven, not the shadows you obey." A duel erupted, not of mere steel, but of sorcery entwined with skill. Frost spread unnaturally, freezing metal, stone, and flesh alike. Rohan moved with deadly precision, guided by the shard's pulse, but each strike, each parry, tugged at him, threatening to unravel his control. Aelin stood behind him, warding the guards, chanting protective spells she had learned from the hermit. The shard pulsed faster, feeding Kaelor's hand, testing Rohan's will. Every breath felt borrowed, every heartbeat a battlefield. Finally, with a surge of will, Rohan drew the shard fully into himself, letting the frost obey only him. The emissary shrieked as black frost recoiled, leaving them exposed. Rohan lunged, driving the tip of his sword into the shadow. A blinding cold flared, and the figure dissipated like smoke caught in a gale. Silence fell. The shard dimmed, quivering in his chest, but Rohan's body ached, drained by the exertion. Kaelor's laughter, faint but insistent, echoed in the corners of his mind. A taste, only a taste. Soon, wolf, soon. The council's envoys, who had been observing from the walls, bowed in fear and awe. Frosthaven's lord had repelled a sorceress attack, but the cost was clear. His hands trembled, his face pale, and the shard's glow lingered unnaturally. Aelin pressed close. You held him back, but he will try again. Rohan looked toward the horizon, where the storm merged with night. Let him try, he whispered. Let him come. Every move he makes, I will meet with fire, ice, and steel. He will not take this city while I still draw breath. Yet deep in his chest, the shard pulsed, reminding him of the fragile tether between power and corruption. And in Frosthaven's dark alleys, unseen, new agents of Kaelor slithered, planning, waiting for the wolf to tire. The siege had shifted. No longer was it merely at the walls. It was inside hearts, inside minds, a war of fear and manipulation. And Rohan, the Iceborn, would have to fight on all fronts, against sorcery, against traitors, and against the whispering darkness that promised to consume him whole. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it Kaelor's promise. The wolf may hold the city tonight, but the game was far from over. The dawn broke pale and brittle over Frosthaven, dusting the city walls with silver frost. Smoke from torched buildings mixed with snowflakes, curling into the gray sky like fingers of warning. The city had held through the night, but victory had come at a cost. Rohan's body ached from the duel with Kaelor's emissary, and the shard pulsed faintly, reminding him that the tether between him and the sorcerer remained unbroken. Aelin moved at his side, her eyes sharp, scanning the streets. They've scattered, but the danger isn't gone. Kaelor will strike again, he always does, and he will strike where we least expect it. Rohan nodded, the weight of the shard pressing against his chest. I can feel him, he said quietly. Even in retreat, Kaelor's hand stretches. He watches. He waits. From the towers, messengers brought grim news. Several key gates had been sabotaged overnight by unknown agents. Frosthaven's walls were stronger than ever, but treachery had found cracks within. Rohan's gaze hardened. The battle outside the walls had been only a prelude. The real war was inside the city itself. Spies, traitors, and magic woven into the stones threatened to unravel everything. We need every ally, Aelin said, her voice steady. The council is shaken, but the people, if they see you falter, they will falter with you. Rohan clenched his fists, the shard glowing warmer in response to his rising fury. He strode to the main square, where citizens gathered, uncertain and fearful. He raised his sword, the emblem of the Iceborn crest catching the weak morning light. People of Frosthaven, his voice rang out over the square, commanding attention. The night has tested us, but we endure. We endure because we are stronger than fear. Stronger than shadows. Murmurs spread through the crowd, and hope flickered in eyes that had been wide with dread. Children peeked from behind mothers, merchants straightened, and soldiers lifted their heads. Yet in every cheer lingered a tremor. The shard's frost a reminder of the unnatural power that now coursed through their lord. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the walls. From the northern gate, a column of dark smoke rose, black ice twisting and writhing around figures clad in shadow. Kaelor's new agents, warlocks and frost-bound wraiths, had arrived in force. Kaelor himself? Rohan muttered, gripping the shard. Aelin's hand went to her dagger. Not yet, but he is close, and he will not come alone. The square erupted in panic. Citizens scattered, soldiers formed hurried lines, and Rohan lifted his sword, letting the shard's frost pour forth in a controlled wave. The wraiths shrieked, frozen in place for a heartbeat, then surged forward again. Rohan moved like a storm, every swing of the sword precise, channeling frost into his enemies, yet careful to control the shard. Aelin cast wards to shield civilians, while soldiers fought alongside their lord, emboldened by the Iceborn's command. The battle raged across the square, frost and shadow entwining in a deadly dance. Rohan's control was strained. Every strike fed Kaelor's tether, every movement a tug of war with the sorcerer's influence. He felt his own strength waver but could not yield. Not now. Not when Frosthaven's heart beat in every street and alley. Then, from the shadows, a single figure stepped forth, tall, cloaked, aura of black frost emanating like smoke. Kaelor had arrived. His voice rolled across the square, cold and mocking. Ah, Iceborn, Kaelor called, eyes gleaming red beneath his hood. You have grown stronger, but every step, every breath, binds you closer to me. And now, the city itself shall tremble beneath your failure. Rohan's breath came ragged, yet he met Kaelor's gaze without faltering. I am no one's pawn, he shouted. Not yours. Not anyone's. Frosthaven stands, and so do I. The air split with a deafening crack. Kaelor raised both hands, summoning a storm of black ice and shadow. The ground shook, buildings splintered, and the sky darkened with unnatural clouds. Rohan stepped forward, sword raised, the shard flaring in answer. Frost met shadow, a blinding clash of power that shook every corner of the city. Soldiers, citizens, and wraiths alike were caught in the storm, frost and darkness weaving chaos. Amidst the roar, Aelin ran to Rohan's side, shouting over the tempest. Together, we hold him together. With a surge of will, Rohan drew the shard fully, letting the iceborne power pour into the frost surrounding Kaelor's magic. He felt the tether tighten dangerously, Kaelor's laughter merging with the shard's pulse, but he did not relent. He was Frosthaven's shield, its sword, its heart. A blinding eruption of frost and shadow sent Kaelor stumbling back, retreating for only a moment. His red eyes burned with promise. The wolf may have defended the city, but the game was far from over. And as the storm cleared, the citizens of Frosthaven looked upon their lord, the Iceborn, their protector, their sword against darkness. Yet even in victory, the shard pulsed, reminding Rohan that Kaelor's hand lingered, whispering promises of power, fear, and ruin. The war was not over. The siege had ended, but the battle for Frosthaven's soul was only beginning. Kaelor's laughter echoed from afar, fading into the horizon. You cannot escape me, wolf. You only delay the reckoning. And Rohan knew, with every heartbeat, that the reckoning was coming, and he would have to face it, alone or with Frosthaven burning around him.